Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. Time to look at some more PS1 Hidden Gems. We've seen some great games so far and some not as great, I'll be honest, sorry. But here we're looking at 10 games for the PlayStation 1 that you have missed, and all of them start with the letter K. As always, don't forget to let us know some of your favourites in the comments below. I will warn you that this episode is quite Japan heavy, so expect a lot of poorly pronounced game titles. Apologies in advance. Now, how about I shut the hell up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. First up is Kingsley's Adventure. Now, this is a game I remember seeing all the time, but never got round to actually playing it until I started looking for games for this series. You play as Kingsley, a fox knight who serves a rabbit king and queen, and rather than ripping them to shreds like his instinct is probably telling him to do, he asks them for help in becoming a true knight. So they send him out on a quest to find knight items, which are various weapons and bits of armour. You have a castle which acts as your hub world. Here you can talk to the various people knocking around to get some training and hints and tips, as well as getting access to the various worlds that the items you need are hidden in. Conveniently, all the places are filled with townsfolk in need of a hero, be it because a barbaric brute is terrorising the town, or maybe your classic dragon has decided to attack. Luckily, that's exactly your bag, so you agree to help these people in distress so you can be a true knight. The game looks great with some really good, bright, colourful graphics. Each of the worlds looks very different, and you'll be exploring beach towns, castles, caves, volcanoes, haunted ships, and more on your quest. Each of the levels plays a bit like a Zelda dungeon, in that you'll need to explore every inch of the environment to find items and keys to help you progress. There's also puzzles all over the place that you'll need to solve. Most of these involve killing things or pushing blocks or pulling switches in the right order to make a key appear or a door open. The puzzles are actually pretty good here, and it was nice that there isn't much hand-holding, but the clues you are given are always just enough to help you. Controlling Kingsley is good, but your usual tank controls of the time, so they can be a little bit stiff and clunky. But you can run and jump, and you have a few weapons to use. You start with a sword, but on your way you get axes, crossbows, and a few more. These each have their own use, and of course some are more powerful but slower than others, and the crossbow is quite weak but good for when you're low on health and don't want to be too close and personal, though be careful as it does take ammo. You've got limited camera control here, and that was really the only thing that was a bit annoying for the game, other than the slightly clunky combat that is. But the combat isn't really the focus here, and it's just as well, as I did get a bit of slowdown when there's a few enemies on screen. You can sidestep and block though, so taking out most bad guys or girls is never too much of a pain. I really enjoyed playing this, and it was definitely not as easy as I thought it was going to be. This is well worth a look if you like a Zelda style adventure. Time for our first badly pronounced Japanese game here is Kakugo No Susume. Actually, that wasn't too bad. This is a one-on-one fighting game based on an anime, of course, and as far as I can tell, evil monsters have appeared, so you pick from a bunch of wacky characters to go and punch the other ones in the face until you're the only one standing. The gameplay is your standard 3D fighting fare. You have a few attack buttons, a special button, and some dodge buttons. Doing different combos, and these does in fact do a few different combos, and it's actually pretty easy to pick up and play. The attacks you do vary slightly depending on what direction you're pressing on the control pad at the time, and it's fun figuring out what combinations string together to do better combos. It's also nice having a dedicated special button so you don't have to worry about complicated inputs. Graphically, the game isn't great, the character models are very blocky and the animation is a little stiff, but it works and the combat does flow enough for you to be able to string a few combos together. Some of the appeal for me were the wacky monster characters, which really stand out from other games. You have your usual humans here and people in super suits, but then there's also manticores and firewomen and lizard-looking fools, and they all play quite well too, and it's cool to see how they handle. Battles here are actually just one long round. You do have 2 life bars, but there's never a break in the action. Once you've depleted both in one go, then it's on to the next character. Something that is a bit of a shame is that there aren't really proper endings, or even a boss. You just beat the usual roster that you have, and then you get a small voiceover, and then the credits roll. It's all quite anticlimactic for a game about monsters appearing all over the world. It also means that it is all over in about 10 minutes or so, which, to be fair, isn't that bad for a fighting game. But also, there really isn't much in the way of content. You don't get any unlockable characters that I could find, and you just have an arcade mode or versus mode, and that's it. Having said that though, it's a solid enough game to warrant a few minutes of your time, and it would be a fun with a couple of mates doing winner stays on. Let's stay in Japan now with Kaigetsu Girl High Tension Comical Action Game The Rapid Angel. Gotta love these Japanese names when they're translated. This is a 2D side-scrolling action game where you choose from one of 3 characters, who I presume are the Rapid Angels, and then you watch some cutscenes that look like they're about to turn into hentai at any minute, but sadly never do, and then you're off running from left to right fighting a load of evil bastards that are causing trouble. Sadly, I have no real idea what the actual story is, as everything is all in Japanese, but you'll go through villages, forests, canyons, and even train rides on your quest that involves a whole lot of ass kicking. You've got 3 characters to choose from, and they actually all play quite differently. One is the all-rounder and is pretty quick and has some good attacks, one has a sword so does more damage but of course is a bit slower, and the last one is really weak but uses projectiles so you can attack from a distance. I really didn't like playing as this character and found her to be pretty useless, so I stuck with the other 2, who are both quite good. The levels are all decent length, but never too long. They've got loads of paths you can take, which all lead to the same place, but it's nice to be able to mix it up on different playthroughs. You'll also find items and power-ups hidden away a lot of the time too. The gameplay here is good, but definitely not perfect. Your characters control pretty well, and hammering the attack button does a combo that deals with most enemies. You can also run and do running attacks, and every character has a double jump which comes in very handy. And then of course you have a special screen clear attack, which sadly is the same for every character, though I guess that doesn't really matter. The enemies range from normal people to flying jellyfish and even crazy mutants and robots, as well as even zombies when you progress. The bosses here are all actually quite fun to fight as well. The game starts out quite easy, but does get challenging as the enemies and attack patterns get more unpredictable. Also, what didn't really help with the difficulty was that no matter who you are, your attack range is actually really short. Well, I guess not for the projectile woman, but she's crap. You almost have to be standing inside an enemy to hurt them. It is kind of annoying to start with, but you do kind of get used to it, and it is quite manageable. In fact, I did find this game quite addictive, and though I haven't actually managed to complete it as of yet, because you only get a few lives and continues, I definitely will be going back to see if I can beat it. It seems like a fairly short game, at least I hope it is, as there's no saves or passwords. Graphically, it's really nothing special, and actually looks like it should be more at home on a 16-bit console, but as I'm not a graphics whore, I don't really care, as the game is fun to play and it's a nice one to check out if you like old platform games. And if you are a fan of 2D platform games, you might want to check out Kaettikita. Now, to me this looks like another game based on an anime, but I don't know for sure. Here you choose from one of 3 cats, each of which is armed to the teeth, and you get to side-scroll your way through some pretty long stages taking down evil robot cats. I get the feeling that you are actually also a robot cat yourself, but you just look more like a regular one. Anyway, the game is basically a side-scrolling shooter along the lines of Contra, with cats. But in fact, it reminds me more of Alien Hominid. But sadly, while the game is fun, it's nowhere near as good as either of those games. The graphics here are bright and colourful, and there's a fair amount of detail on the backgrounds, but I will say that the whole game does just feel a little bit cheap, kind of like it should have been a Flash game. This is surprising as it's actually made by Konami, and you can even tell this as it has some definite nods to Contra in here, like the first end of level boss. The gameplay is good though, but by no means great. You can move left and right, and you can jump and shoot. There's a ton of enemies and destructible objects in each level, and you'll often find power-ups. Most of these are secondary weapons like shields, rockets or homing missiles, but the game also has a Gradius style power-up system where you collect power-ups and then you can choose to use them how you want. You can either upgrade your speed, your primary weapon power, or you can use it to get some life back. It can often be hard to know what you should choose, as there are no other life power-ups in levels at all. What is good though is that when your weapons are powered up, they stay powered up even when you die, so it is all permanent. You also have a few weapons to choose from. You have your standard machine gun, a rocket launcher, flamethrower, a mallet, a sword and a double shot. Some of these use ammo which needs to be collected in the levels, but they can all be powered up too, and each have their own uses. You also find some pretty cool boss fights here. but I do wish they had life bars, as it can be hard to tell if you're doing any damage to them, but it is just a case of keep shooting and you'll win eventually. You can also play this game in 2-player co-op if you're one of these people that has a friend, and while it's definitely not a polished game, I would recommend checking it out, even just as a curiosity. But after all, curiosity did kill the cat. Whee! Kamen Rider V3, or is it Kamen Rider? I'm going to go with Kamen, is a cinematic fighting game based on the Kamen Rider series that sadly I've never seen, but I think I'd quite like it. Here you have one-on-one fighting game that has a ton of game modes, though I'm not entirely sure what most of them are as I can't read Japanese, but they mostly involve punching people in the face. As you can see, the series is very much like Power Rangers, so you have a ton of crazy characters to choose from and fight against here, and the game is a load of fun to play. The story mode sees you play out various bits from the series as different characters, and the game has some of the best graphics I've seen on the system. The detail and animation on everything is amazing, it all plays super smooth, and thankfully the combat mirrors this. You've got punches, kicks and throws, as well as a special button, and like the game we saw earlier, you need to do different combinations of these to do different attacks and combos. It's loads of fun getting to learn them all. As with your special attacks, if you manage to connect them, it plays a small cinematic that looks really fantastic, showing the move play out. Also, what I really like with the story mode is that as you're fighting, the enemies will sometimes just run away, or midway through your fight, it cuts to a completely different fight with different characters, showing what another character is up to while you're having a fight, before going back to your fight that you hadn't finished from previously. This is a really cool touch, and even though it's all in Japanese, I could still sort of tell what was going on. After all, it's just big alien monsters having fights. As you fight, you also earn coins, which can be used to unlock a load of new content. This would be a must-have for anyone who's a fan of the series, but also it's well worth playing for anyone that likes crazy Japanese TV shows or fighting games. And our last game from Japan is Kyuliin. Sorry if I said that wrong. Again, I'm guessing that from the intro that it's based on an anime, but there's no way I'll ever find out for sure. This is a crazy side-scrolling shooter where you play as a brother and sister who do the usual thing of riding on the back of a vacuum cleaner, shooting the shit out of a bunch of wacky enemies that seem to think they're tougher than you. You know, the normal stuff. Yeah, I don't really know the story, but I think it has something to do with reading books while cleaning and then having a mad dream or probably an LSD trip. The game looks alright, but it isn't pushing the system at all. It's got 2D sprites and they look good, but they won't blow you away or anything. For the most part, this game is really what you'd expect from a shooter. Enemies come at you from every angle, and you have a load of different weapons to blast them to bits. At the end of every stage, you'll fight a large boss who always fires a ton of projectiles into your child face. What's cool though is that as you're on a vacuum, you can use its suction to your advantage. You can use the nozzle to suck up most smaller enemies as well as their projectiles that they fire. This is a great way to defend yourself, coupled with the barrage of shots that you'll be firing. Though don't get too complacent, as you can still be hit quite easily if you're not paying attention. What's more is that as you suck things up, the meter at the bottom of the screen builds. This is your special meter, and the more full this is, the bigger your special blast you can let out of your vacuum is, doing massive damage. Also, you can see the things you've sucked up get fired out at the enemies, which do even more damage. When you're fully powered, you can even take out most bosses in just one hit. This is a really cool mechanic, and it really helps give the game a risk versus reward feel to it, as you'll see enemies and bullets that you want to suck up, but you do risk taking damage by getting to them. If you do get hit, your nozzle will fall off and your weapons will power down. After a few seconds, a first aid kit will appear. If you grab this before taking another hit, then you'll be repaired and it's back to full power, but if you do take another hit, you're dead. Thankfully, you do get a few lives, and I think you even get infinite continues, so this game is kinda easy, but it's loads of fun to play through, especially as the levels and enemies get crazier the further in you go. Definitely try this one out if you're a fan of shoot 'em ups. Back to the West now with games that I can pronounce, and here is, oh for goodness sake, Kagero Deception 2. Who the hell comes up with these names? In an interesting turn of events, here you play as the bad guys, as you play a massive game of Home Alone against unwilling adventurers. The game is probably best described as a cross between a turn-based RPG and a home invader simulator. Your character is an evil witch woman who works for another evil witch woman, but what's betting that by the end of the game you become good? Anyway, you're defending your castle and yourselves from a load of people that just want to ruin your day by killing you. To do this, you have to set up traps and lure them into said traps to kill them, and it's loads of fun. You basically have a free roam of any environment that you're in, and you start out with a few basic traps like bear traps and poison gas. Then, as the bad guys, or really the good guys, come into where you are, you can set these traps in real time, and then as you're chased, you can press the button that they're assigned to on the controller to set them off and eventually kill whoever is after you. It's great. Before each level, you can see the enemies that are coming after you, and of course learn about them and their weaknesses. Sometimes you have just one at a time, but often you'll have multiple enemies all with their own weaknesses, as well as their own weapons and intelligence, so don't expect to pull the same tricks every time. Each trap does have a cooldown period, but you can use them as often as you like once they've recharged. You also get points for how well you kill people, just like in real life, and these can be used to buy or upgrade the traps you already have. Not all traps do damage though, and some of them will just cause the floor to be slippery or sticky, or you can make enemies fall into hazards or just slow them down. There's actually quite a lot to it, and you'll need to work out what the best combinations of traps work best for you. And speaking of combinations, that's really what you want to do. Place the traps in a way that you can use all of them in succession, dealing massive damage. The game looks really good with some excellent characters and animation, and there's a needlessly convoluted story in here, which isn't bad, but it does take itself rather seriously if you ask me. I really had a blast playing this one. It is a bit of a slower paced game with loads of ways to kill people, it's often unintentionally funny, and it's well worth a look. And here is, oh for goodness sake, Koudelka. Flippin' heck. There is a reason your stupid games don't sell, it's because you give them stupid names. Here is Koudelka. This is a strategy RPG where you take control of a psychic woman who is drawn to a mysterious mansion. When she gets there, she meets an injured bloke who's been hunting monsters and is all but dead. Thankfully, you're a healer type, so you fix him up good, and then the two of you set out exploring the mansion to find out what's going on and why it's full of all sorts of terrifying monsters. Exploring the mansion is basically like a Resident Evil game. It's all pre-rendered backgrounds, and you'll need to explore and find items and keys to solve the puzzles and progress. It's all fixed camera angles, but basically any items you need are lit up, which is handy. Of course, this can cause some issues in getting lost, as there were times where I didn't realise I could walk in a certain direction, or I couldn't see a door that was hidden in a dodgy angle. But the battles here, which are the main thing, are all turn-based and in 3D. They're all random encounters, so you'll be bumping into bad guys all over the place. Then you've got 2 actions per turn, but you can't do the same action twice. You can choose to move, attack, use magic or an item, or sometimes you'll need to change your weapon, which also counts as an action. The battles are actually all really good, and I never got annoyed at the frequency. The variety of monsters is very good too, and they do get pretty tough. As you play, you'll find more weapons and better armour, as well as learn more magic as you level up. The weapons can be used by most characters, and what's interesting is that you can find guns here, but they do take ammo, so you'll need to keep this in mind when fighting, as reloading is an action, and you can run out of ammo. Of course, each character also has their own special abilities. Some just might be better with melee attacks or maybe magic, so you'll need to learn to position your party correctly in the battles to make the best use of their skill set. Graphically, the game is great with a cool dark tone to everything. It's all quite medieval and Lovecraftian looking, while still being set in a relatively modern era. It's not really something you see that often, but it works really well. If you like your strategy RPGs, then definitely give this a look, but be warned, it does get pretty tough after just a few hours. KKND, or should I say Crush, Kill and Destroy 2 Krossfire, with a K of course, is a cheerily named real-time strategy game like Command & Conquer, where 3 races are recovering from a nuclear war and of course wants to be the one to rule the planet, or what's left of it anyway. You have the survivors, who were hiding underground when all this stuff happened, and so they've come back up to the surface and want to reclaim their planet. Then there's the evolved, who were on the surface the whole time, so they've mutated, and as such use mutated wildlife as their units, which, to be honest, is pretty damn cool. And then there's the Series 9, who are basically robot things that started out as farming robots but decided to take on the world instead. No matter who you choose, the gameplay is basically the same. You build units and bases in order to complete certain objectives, which usually involves killing everyone that isn't on your side. You do need to get resources to afford to buy new units, but you will sometimes also just come across them hanging around in the levels. Each level is quite large, and there's generally a big number of threats on each one that you'll need to take out. In fact, the game starts off really damn hard, and it actually took me ages just to beat the first stage. This is definitely a game that I would recommend reading the manual for, or at least looking up some kind of tutorial, as while it does seem quite simple initially, it's actually quite complex in a lot of areas, and building bases and gathering resources is really nowhere near as intuitive as it should be. Graphics wise, it's fine, but not really that impressive. The game does run quite smoothly, but your units are tiny and can be quite choppy, so it's hard to select certain ones or get your cursor on enemies accurately. This does cause a few problems, but thankfully your units do have a bit of common sense when they're near something that needs killing. Though I did notice they're not so great if someone's trying to kill them. If enemies are on higher ground and shooting down at you, your units make absolutely no attempt to move out of the way or fight back. This is no fun when you're exploring the map and then you go back to your squad only to find half of them wiped out by an enemy you didn't see off the screen. In the single player, there's loads of missions for you to complete for each of the factions, and as mentioned, the game really throws you in at the deep end. Though with some practice and a bit of luck, and especially after reading the manual, it is perfectly manageable. I did end up actually having a lot of fun with this, and it's worth picking up if you like building armies and overwhelming your enemies. And finally for today, we're going back to Japan for Kagen's Soukou Gunbike, Speed Power Gunbike. Amazingly, this isn't based on an anime, but it really looks like it should be. It's set in the future, and you choose from one of 3 bikers with your usual stat differences, and then every level sees you racing to the end of the stage while smashing through barriers, avoiding enemies, and then taking on a huge boss. Each of the bikes has 3 forms. You've got your regular bike, which is fast but not that manoeuvrable. Then there's the rally mode, where your bike's wheels spread out and you're a bit slower but you have better turning. This is good for the more open stages or bosses. And finally there's robot mode. You'll need to use this to crash into enemies or barriers to break through or destroy them. If you crash into enemies while you're in any of the other forms, you run the risk of falling off your bike and you'll waste valuable time running back to it. That's right, all the levels here are timed, and your objective is basically just to get to the end. As you get further into the game, the levels become more littered with enemies and obstacles, and it becomes pretty hard to make it to the end in the time limit. You can also get lost in some of the stages, which also doesn't help. Thankfully though, you switch between your forms with the press of a button, and this is really cool. You can change to your robot very quickly with the press of a button, which also automatically attacks for you, and the transition looks great, though you will need pretty good reactions for it. The graphics here are good and everything looks like it should be out of an anime. There's a few jagged edges, but for the most part the robot designs are cool and the game style works well. The controls do take a while to get used to, but once you know what you're doing, it's very fun to play. Though some of the boss fights can be annoying as you can't see them properly thanks to a lack of camera controls. There is quite a lot of story here, but again, it's all in Japanese, so I have no idea what they're on about, but I'm sure it's your usual Japanese melodrama about evil corporations, big robots, and boys that are scared to talk to girls. All that being said, this is a really cool game. It just isn't like much else out there. Well worth a look if you want something different. So there you go, 10 games that you may not know about for the PS1 that start with the letter K. What other games could we included on this list? Let us know in the comments below. On screen now you can see where you can follow us, so why not do so? We have loads of cool content for everyone to enjoy. Now all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.